Earth Day. See, there were a lot of people right over there.
Totally.
Yeah. So they used to they did this for a while where lots of events got jammed up, and then for a little while it seemed like they had people meeting and figuring out when to do events. And that was good because
in a small town, and all of them are wonderful events.
Yes.
Small towns that overlap.
And they kept doing charity events, like 2 or 3 of them on one night. Like, that doesn't work. So I guess they need to, whatever they were doing, they need to do it again. Okay. I guess I'm going to just start. Hello. My name is Charles Vess. Some of you may know me, some of you not. I've been making my living as an illustrator for the last 45 years. I did work in commercial animation for a couple of years, and then I moved to New York City on a hope and a dream, and did lots of laundry in the bathtub and lots of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and got work in comics. For a while I was drawing Spider-Man, and later on Sandman and Swamp Thing and various things. And then I sort of moved into books, illustrated books and children's books, and that's what I've been doing ever since. A lot of that, especially the early years with the comic book artists, I learned that collaboration was a really good thing. And I did most of the work for Marvel Comics, and they had what was known as the Marvel method, and which was you, the editor, and the writer went out for lunch and discussed the story, a plot line. Then the writer went back home and typed up about a page and a fourth and gave it to you as the artist, and then you drew 22 pages out of that. So there was lots of you couldn't just, you had to draw faces, but then I didn't know what they were saying, so I had them talking. I started writing dialogue because it just came to me, and the writers really didn't like seeing all this dialogue. They would erase it. But if you didn't do the dialogue, then it was a frozen face with no emotion, and it was really boring. So it was just the way I had to do it. But I learned that every once in a while you would start working with a writer that would respond to what you were drawing, and then they would suggest something, and then my drawing would get better and his writing would get better, and the collaboration when we worked became a third person, where neither one of you by yourself would have done that. The way I usually try to explain that is if you're sitting in a room by yourself trying to think of a joke, it's not very easy. But if you're sitting at a bar with 5 or 6 people and you start talking about something and it bounces off one after the other, and it becomes actually a really funny joke. And it's just that, and that's collaboration. It can be wonderful when it works and horrible when it doesn't. But most of the time, I tried to work. As my career went on, I realized that the better the writing I worked with, the better my art was. It would pull things out of you that sort of boring writing wouldn't. It was much, much harder to apply yourself to something that you didn't like the writing of. So I, would try to talk up writers, go to conventions, and there were a number of them that I met. Neil Gaiman, Charles DeLint, a Canadian writer. We actually started corresponding in 1976 when I just came across. I was cleaning out an old building that we own out that way, and I found the letters that we wrote back and forth to each other. And before he was published as an author, he was an editor of what was called a fanzine, and he paid $5 an illustration. And that's what I started doing with him. And but we enjoyed writing back and forth, suggesting music and books and all sorts of things, and we've remained friends ever since. and we've done a couple books together that the more we did, the more we tried to play with that collaboration. The last bunch of them, The Cats of Tanglewood Forest and Seven Wild Sisters, we'd usually meet at a convention and talk about a story, and then he would write a kind of a synopsis of characters, not the story, but just the characters, and then he'd have me draw them, and I would come up with various things they might look at, and then he would describe them that way, and we would go back and forth. Neil with Stardust was a book that I ended up doing 175 paintings for. Took a couple of years, and he would write scenes that he wanted to see me paint. Didn't know what they would look like, so he'd just write them. There was one that's like, I think it's 2 or 3 sentences long in the book, and kind of near the end where the Tristan and Yvain are in a flying ship that's capturing thunderbolts, and they dock on this giant tree that has hundreds of other flying boats docking on its limbs with all these buildings on it. And he wrote it in a couple sentences and then said, do a double-page spread of that. So it was really fun to develop that scene. But my latest, I'll show you some of the latest collaboration, was with Ursula K. Le Guin, who's a really well-known maybe I'll just change the drawing. How about that? Maybe it'll like that better. And she's someone I've been reading since I was in my 20s, and I loved her writing. And I never in my wildest dreams thought I'd be illustrating her work. She was already very renowned, especially in that field. But over the years, her talent sort of seeped out of the genre, and people realized how good she was. And she was winning National Book Awards and being designated distinguished contribution to American literature and various things like that. So when a friend of mine became the executive director of Saga Press, one of the first things he wanted to do was collect all of her Earthsea books, there were 6 of them, and have me illustrate them. And that both made me excited and made me want to pee in my pants. But eventually it became obvious that she was not going to work with anyone she didn't like. She was in her 80s by then, and she told Joe Monte, my editor, that she was too old to work with people she didn't like. So whoever he wanted to do this had to call her up, and basically she had to like them. So I had been around her at various conventions and been too shy to talk to her because what are you going to say? Gee, you write good. But you need to do that with any writer you like. No matter how stupid it sounds, they like it. It's good for them, and it's good for you, because if you haven't told them that and they go off and die, you'll be really sorry you didn't tell them that. It's a good thing to do. So I had to call her up. And I was very nervous. We had made the appointment on Friday, and we were going to talk on Monday, and I spent the whole weekend obsessing about this, whatever. But I shouldn't have really worried, because we had a great conversation. We talked for about an hour and a half about all sorts of stuff. She was very witty and direct. She obviously was not going to suffer any kind of fools. And we talked about collaboration, and I really, since all my training had been to like that, and she had worked with any number of artists that said, yes, I want to collaborate, and then as soon as the contract was signed, they went off and did whatever they did and never talked to her again. And she had done theater and music things, and she really loved what happened with collaboration. So she, that's what she wanted, and when I told her I wanted to do that, I could tell that there was a certain amount of disbelief in her voice over the phone. But over the years, we worked together for 4 years and exchanged thousands of emails. And near the end of the whole process, she sent me a copy of the latest book that had come out, and she personalized it to the best collaborator ever.
Oh.
So that made me feel really good. But in the first year, there were three, to do this collection, there were 3 publishers that already had the rights to all the books. And Joe Monte had to work out the contract negotiations to get them all signed on the same page, which I just can't imagine what that was like, and I'm really glad I didn't have to hear about any of it. But over this year of them dickering with the contract, Ursula had already signed this idea, up for this idea, and I hadn't gotten a contract yet. And she started getting a little nervous, and she was antsy. She wanted to see some drawing, and I, told her about the fact that I didn't have a contract, and she completely understood that. But what we decided to do was, what was the dragons going to look like? There are really important characters in the stories, and no one had ever drawn them the way she saw them in her head. And my whole idea to do the illustrations was to crawl inside her head and draw it the way she saw it, see this world. So the only way I could do it was show her drawing. So I sent her this. Of course, this was completely wrong. Just one second. Next is the battery part. Yes. Hey. So everything is wrong here. She said, he's too skinny. You have to think of these dragons. They've eaten lots of lambs and sheep, and they're pretty full. They're satisfied. Also, in her mythology, the humans and the dragons all came from the same creature, beginning creature, and the dragons had rejected owning things and building things, so they didn't have hands, and I'd drawn hands there. Talons, but they still are, they could articulate, and they shouldn't be. It would look to typically sort of European dragon, monstrous, slanted eyes. She was like, no, none of that's right. And the only way, she would talk a little bit about it, and then I would do another drawing. I did this, and this was, of course, also all wrong. Still, this was one of the second drawing I did. Still had the fingers. I think this is when she started telling me, no, they didn't have fingers. They had more like alligator claws. The mouth was too long here. The eyes are too slanted. She started wanting human eyes, less mouth. This was very lion-like. It was fun, but it wasn't her dragon. And I probably will use that sometime in something else. I did this. She enjoyed the fact that it seemed like it was really flying. But the face was too ugly, craggy, and I think I did a close-up of this, yes. She liked that I'd opened the eyes up, made the mouth a little less long. She wanted the nostrils to look like a horse. But when she saw this, she said, you've made a lot of progress, but it's still, can I say this? It's still too male. She wanted it female features. So as soon as I, almost the same face, but as soon as I lowered horns and had them flap down, then she liked that a lot. And then I did this, and she was like, that's it, we have achieved dragon, is what she said. So that was really exciting. And all this was done before any illustrations. And it was good because I knew I was going to be drawing a lot of different dragons, and it's good to know what they look like beforehand. This was my sketch for the cover, initial cover, in pencil, real rough. she was asking for Tanar, the woman in the books. I don't know how many, have you read these books? Anybody? No. Well, there's two main characters. There's Ged, who's dark-skinned, and the wizard. He's got a scar covering the right side of his face from bad things he did when he was young. And then Tanar, who is this woman he finds on one of the few islands in this archipelago of islands that has pale-skinned people living on it. So here she comes. At this time I had, in the story, there's this whole thing with the ring of, I can't remember what they call it. There's this, it's supposed to go around your arm. And I had it broken because they come together and they bring it, make it whole. And this is the first inked version. Everything's more articulated. You can see I use different colored inks for some of this stuff. Most of this is sepia, and then the water's all blue. A little bit of color, a little more color. And that's a finished piece. I think it's still, if you look at the end papers in the book, it's a full ring here and up here. And I'm taking it off of here. That was not easy, but everyone wanted it. And I really enjoyed this, and Ursula called it my Tiepolo composition. She loved the waves. But when most of the book, all of the interior book was left to Ursula and I to decide what we wanted in it. The Saga, Joe Monte, had never wanted to have any say-so in that. But he said, when the cover comes, you've got me, you've got the art director, you've got the marketing department, you've got the president of the company, everyone's going to be putting their 2 cents in. He wanted to forewarn me, and they all did. So eventually they decided to, I think I got it. Yeah. That became the cover, which was going to, because the back cover was going to have a lot of type on it. And they liked the big image of the dragon. But then Joe Monte came up with the idea of using the full painting as the end paper design in the book, and that made me really happy. And I'll just show you some of these. It took like 4 years to do this. I learned lots of things in this. Originally, this drawing, this is the school of wizardry that Gad, who's right there, who's gotten off this ship, is going to go and go up the streets. And when I first drew it, it was very high, and Ursula asked that it be shorter. Also, these were horses here, and she said there's very few horses on Earthsea, just stuff like that. She never asked for, told me how to draw anything. She would just talk about what should be there. And this was a thing I really enjoyed doing, and I've done it often enough, is in this piece, if you think about it, right here you're looking down, and right there you're looking up. And it's kind of like a fisheye lens. It sort of opens up the whole piece. I once had an art director tell me, well, you can't do that. I was like, it's art. Why can't you do it? So it was fun. I worked on this for 4 or 5 days on the color. It took a long time to draw it. There was a lot of details. But it wasn't working, and then I went back and reread the text and realized it was very early morning. The sun was just coming up. And because I used these colored inks, washes of colored inks, I could take my school eraser pencil and erase the color off the tops of the buildings. And it looked just like the sun was coming up. It made me very happy. And these were done with black. The black and white images are done with Prismacolor black on 100% rag board paper, but it's just a pad of paper you get at Office Depot. So nothing mysterious. This is Ged when he's young, coming to the wizarding school the first time and meeting the master in the courtyard. And this, so I've done this is near the end of the first book, and he's at the beginning of the book he's read spells, magic spells that he was not prepared for, and released his shadow self, monstrous shadow self. And throughout the whole book it keeps showing up, and eventually he has to track it across endless waves and oceans and land to find it and confront it and bring it back into himself. It's a really powerful scene, and I had drawn this figure quite a bit more humanoid-like, and Ursula told me the story that one of the things that would happen with these drawings, the sketches, is that they would bring back memories that she hadn't thought of in years and years and years. And that was really fun to hear. But this, she said in the 60s, when she was writing this, late 1960s, her form of relaxation was to go out into the garden with a glass slide and put something on it and then bring it back in and look at it under a microscope. And she'd see weird stuff in there. It was always, she found it really fascinating. Well, one day she did that, and she came back and she saw this sort of man-like, or humanoid creature, going across the surface of the slide. And it was dark and not focused, fuzzy edge, and it was scary. And the same, so she was like, it shouldn't look like a human. But she also told me that she sent me a photograph of these creatures, tardigrades, but nowadays you have micro photography and you can show exactly what it looks like, and it's actually kind of goofy looking. But with the way she saw it, it was not goofy. So that was fascinating. The second book, when I was 20 years old, just didn't have enough adventure, didn't have dragons. It was my least favorite book. Now it's one of my favorite books of the 6, and probably drew out the best drawings of all of the collection. This is set on a far island, and in this priestess lore, the high priestess is always a reincarnated version of herself, and they go out, the priestess go out and find a woman, young girl child who's born on the same day as the old woman has died, old priestess has died. And they bring her in and they strip her of her name, and she becomes the high priestess. And this is her, this is Tanar, very young. And this is pretty much of a throwaway line in the book of she's at night dancing in front of the throne of the black gods and imagining all the reincarnations of herself dancing and twisting around about her. And it just became one of my favorite drawings in the whole book. It was really fun. One of the things that happens with a big giant book, and they kept telling me how big it was going to be, and I never believed it till I actually saw the book, is that, you know, it's 1,000 and some pages long. It means the gutter, center of the book, where it's glued together or stapled together, if you drew that as a continual drawing all the way across 2 pages, a lot of that art would disappear. So I decided to break it up and use this white margin in between it. That's where the gutter is. You can ask me any question that you've got. You don't have to just keep listening and rattle on. This is Ged. He's about 40 years old here. She's about 18. And there's a vast labyrinth underneath this temple, and she's trapped him there. And he's in this passage with these white figures painted on the wall. And this went through about 6 or 7 versions before we were all satisfied with it. This is the end of the book. Ged here and Tanar in his boat, the Lukfar, and they're out leaving the island, going out to sea. I went, oh, we'll have to have the sunset here. And then I drew this shadow right there, which I don't know where that shadow would come from, but it looked too good to get rid of, so I left it. So maybe there's a light somewhere over here.
Magic.
Magic. Magic. Third book. This is Kalesson, I think, or Armimbar, the dragon. And I wanted light coming through the wings. This is Ged, and this is his young man, Lebanon. The dragon is there, and Ursula loved the waves. She thought they were very Hokusai waves, but she wondered about why the mast was doing that. And then she said, and then, Charles, I realized that the dragon is there. It's not standing still. It's flapping its wings, and it's causing, in the backdraft, it's causing the mast to do that. Good. She got it, the sail to do that. Early one morning, leaving the island. Magic is seeping away from the world, and they're trying to find out why. And why is because this man who didn't want to die is not dying, and all the people, the land where all the dead people are filling up with too many people, too many sort of bodies. Getting out of the land of the dead is exhausted Ged. He's up here. He is done with doing. This is the 4th book, which is basically all about Tanar. And it took, between the 3rd book and the 4th book, it was 18 years in her life. Because she knew what she wanted to write about, she just didn't know how. So she raised her children and thought about it. And the book, the 4th book, is an extended kind of conversation between Tanar and Auntie Moss, who's this sort of hedge witch. And it's the conversation is basically about why don't men listen to women? And wouldn't we all be better off if they did? So it's a really nice read, interesting read. The 5th book is kind of novellas filling in the history of Earthsea. And I got to do one big giant tree, so I did. This is the Imminent Grove, which is the grove of trees that grows on the island that eventually becomes the home of the wizards. And the roots go down through the world and wrap it up and keep it together. And this is the end of the 6th book. One of the things that happened is all the way through the books, and it works as a device in the earlier books, is there is this low, at the edge of the world, there's this low stone wall, and across it are where the dead people live. But they're soulless, they don't know each other, it's totally silent and dusty. It's really, it works as a sort of visual and interesting idea until you go, wait a minute, that's not where I want to go when I die. So by the 6th book, she's started postulating that magic is leaving the earth, and it's not working right on the island of wizards, which is the center of this universe. But all the wizards have been male and celibate, and that's not the way to go. Women need to be there. And when the woman comes, and the young men, and the dragon, this is a person that can be both a dragon and a woman, and they tear the wall down, and all the dead people that are in that area come out, and sort of as they cross the torn down wall, disappear into the air. And it's a very satisfying thing in the book. some of the stories, the characters. She really wanted me to concentrate on the common folk, the peasants, the people working in the land. So this was almost the only drawing I did of a great golden hall of wizardry. And I thought, if I'm going to do it, I better really, really do it. So I like this one a lot. And this is what I thought was going to be the last drawing in the whole process. And this is Ged. He's about 70 years old now, and she's in her 50s. They're in this, the house, goat. And I didn't have any of these until Ursula said, "More chickens, Charles. I need more chickens." The other thing that happened that was just so delightful was I'd done all these drawings, and every time I'd drawn this house, this is where Ged had grown up. It was a stone house. And Tanar, when she's returning home, the second to last page of the book, is walking down the hill to the little wooden house. Ursula, you call it a wooden house? You never said that before. And she went, "Well, he's a wizard, isn't he?" So we agreed that he could just change it into stone if he wanted it. So it was pretty fun. And right during this time period, she was talking about the house, and I just, in my mind, I knew I wasn't going to do a drawing inside of it, but I got really interested in drawing a layout of the house. I just wanted to know what was in there. And after she passed away, they found a story in her papers called Firelight, which is the last story of Ged. I won't tell you what happens, but you can probably guess by that picture. And in it was written exactly when we were talking about the house, and it's describing the house. And it's really cool. And the other thing I did here was, this isn't put in the book, in the story, the thistle, but she's used the imagery of the thistle several times throughout the book, and to me it became the representation of Ursula, in that it's very beautiful to look at, but if you try and grab it, you're going to really get prickled. And get hurt. It just seemed perfect for her. And that's Ged going off into the west. And that's the end of that book. But we also did she emailed me one day and said, "These people want me to be part of this project, and it's going to support, all the proceeds will go to support the New York Public Library. And they want a writer to pick an artist and then to do a little story or a poem. And they will be part of this double-page spread in this book." And I was going to tell them no, and then I went, "Charles would do a nice thing. Let's get him." So she asked me to, we talked about it, emailed back and forth. And I came up with this idea, went home and slept, and came up with this idea of a dragon, since we'd done so much with dragons, that hoarded books instead of gold. And he was nearsighted, so he couldn't read the books. So children would come and bring their pie and their tea and read him a book a day, and he really liked that. This actually became the inspiration for two large pieces I did for the Kingsport Library, a children's section, children's library. And the book took about 4 years, but it finally came out this year. It's one of those books I've always wanted to be in. It's got, the contributors are like David Byrne and Jane Goodall and Yo-Yo Ma and Neil Gaiman and all these kind of people. You're like, oh cool, I'm in the book with them. So I'm probably the only really traditional looking art in the entire book. There you go. And I thought I'd just run through this. I just finished, and this was a strange collaboration. I finished this children's picture book. I started this, drew it in pencil, and then hit a wall, couldn't figure out how to go, and stopped and did the Earthsea book, and came back and I used colored pencil on it instead of my usual colored inks, and it worked really cool. I liked it a lot. But this guy, this eccentric, I'd have to say eccentric writer, eventually, when I got it all done, apparently I'd done something wrong and he took his name off the book. You know, like, what are you doing? Like you do. But anyway, I'll just go through this. There's words on each one of these pages, but not many. It's all, this young boy sees this beaver. He's right there, up there. Startles the beaver. Beaver drops the stick. The stick becomes the protagonist of the story. And the stick goes down the stream. And there's always a number of animals around. Goes around the bend, and then goes down, down, down. Rushes up against these rocks and gets stuck right there. And is there the whole winter. And then winter turns to spring. And the stick's still there. There's all sorts of little animals flying around. Goes on down the stream and eventually gets pushed into some grasses, high grasses, and is stuck there for a while. It's missing some pages here. Turtles play on it. Those sliders, those flat sort of turtles, they make a noise and they all fall off the limb. So, gulls play with it. It's over there. Trawler, fishing trawler picks it up and, along with a lot of fish, throws it back into the water. It's sort of become driftwood by now, and it washes up to shore. And the same young boy who's there on vacation finds the stick and picks it up and starts drawing with it all over the sand. Chases the birds with it. And eventually takes it home. Summer's over, and the leaves are starting to turn autumn again. And the last picture in the book is him up in the tree watching the beaver still making his thing bigger. And that's it. But yeah, he took his name off and used a pseudonym or something like that. And I thought, and last week they asked me to write I needed a dedication in the book if I wanted to write one, and I almost wrote his real name. But he changed his name, and it wouldn't have been so maddening, except that I hand drew the lettering for the cover, and written by and illustrated by, and I had to change his name for that and to go back and do it. So, but I don't know what he's thinking, but he also had to wait 6 years, so he's got every right to be pissed off a little bit, I guess. Where are we time-wise?
20 minutes, 23 minutes left.
Okay, well, I'll leave that up there. We got any questions? Yes.
When you're coming to getting a vision for the characters in a story, I know you said like for the Earthsea ones, you had already read the books.
A lot of times.
Yeah. So as an artist, what's more helpful for you to? Would you rather just read a story or book, or get that specific character description from the writer? Like, would you rather read and imagine something yourself, or?
I would, but one of the things I was very careful about there is, out of 56 illustrations in the book, there's only 2 of them that are close-up. Because these books have been read by millions of people all over the world, lots of times, and they've got their own idea of what these characters look like. And I didn't want to get in the way of that.
What if you were working on a new book?
On my own, everything,
everything
you want. With Stardust, I created the characters. It's like they're going to look the way I want them to look. But if you have to approach things in different ways. And with an established book, unless the author's dead, can
Right.
do anything you want.
Right.
Like Shakespeare, oh, I'll just draw it this way. But you have to be careful, you have to be respectful of, you're collaborating with the writer as an artist, but you're also, and almost even just as importantly, you're collaborating with the viewers. And you have to leave something for them to get themselves and to be part. If you can get the viewer, the reader, to be part of the story, then your job's done. And so leaving some poetic space is really important to me. I don't really respond to painting or art that every single detail is completely rendered in it. I think all you can do is look at it and go, oh wow, that's a lot of work, and then you go on to the next one. Whereas if there's a space that you're looking at that you have to make up your mind what it is, then it becomes a better piece. I think the same thing with writing too, is you have to, you have to try to collaborate with your readers. And you don't have to sell everything. There's a couple of books I've read that, it's like every single thing is described, and it's not really, the books are giant books, but there's no point in them being giant books. It's just, all it is description. It goes endlessly to me. And those, I don't respond to those. Anything else?
Yeah, when Hitchcock would do his movies, he always said that what happened off screen was more terrifying than what he would show.
Yeah.
So, how do you, when you're illustrating something, how do you know what to leave out?
Well, I always try to, there was a book I illustrated a good while ago by Susanna Clark, who wrote Jonathan the Strange and Mr. Gnarl. That was a big international hit. Well, she did a collection of short stories that I illustrated called The Ladies of Grace Adieu. And in the first story, and it features a couple of, Jonathan Gnarl is in there, I think. Yeah. But in the story, there's a scene that just put my hackles up. It was just amazingly scary to me. And the women, these three women, have come to visit in Dorset, and they've gone off with their brother to his reprobate friend's house, and those guys have gotten kind of drunk, and they're doing things they ought not to be doing. And one of the sort of awful men wanders into this hall, and he thinks he can see a shadow of an owl on the wall. End of scene. And now it was like, and then the next day, the three women are at lunch at tea, and they're having this conversation about something totally else than that, and all three of them politely cough into their handkerchiefs and their little owl pellets left in there. And you're like, oh! And I just, that visual of in the hall with the shadow of the owl on the wall and stuff was really, really strong, but I also did not want to rob the reader's vision of that. It just seemed wrong, so I didn't draw it, didn't illustrate it, I drew other things instead. You just have to make up your own mind.
Did you draw the tea party?
No, I didn't. Yes.
I have a friend who is a children's book writer, and she's got the Pulitzer a couple of years ago.
All right.
Before that, she was a ghostwriter for someone else who was doing like a series.
Right, yeah.
Young adult, girls, horses, that kind of thing. And she was getting more and more work because it got real popular. Everyone wanted the next book, and the original author couldn't keep up with it, so she's writing these books. And she got through an entire book, the entire manuscript, and had a description of the horses these girls are riding, and including the color. Well, then she gets the cover design that they had contracted someone to illustrate, and the horses were different colors. And instead of asking the illustrator to match the color in the text, she was asked to go back and change every time it was bay or chestnut, change it to gray and whatever they had. And so she was You know, at which point does the author determine it? I guess if you're a ghostwriter, you never do.
Never did.
Yeah.
It is easier to change the text.
It
but-
is. Well, okay.
And it is, just physically easier, but, it would depend, like that, you can do a search find and go through the manuscript and you can change those things pretty easily. But if it's, you know, if the artist has gone off the wall and painted something that's not in the book and they want you to change it,
So-
that I would be totally against.
So would the author not have, or the illustrator not have either read the book or known what a bay and a chestnut was, or didn't care, or wasn't
Didn't
told or
care.
something?
Sometimes
Just-
it's the art director's not telling them.
Okay.
Sometimes it's just like, draw some horses, I don't care.
Yeah.
You know, I know, way long ago, there was an illustrator, Frank Frazetta, who was incredibly, incredibly popular. And they had he would do paintings and they'd have a book written about him. You know, instead of the other way around.
Oh, wow.
And they were like barbarian, monster, blah, blah, blah. You know, they're not
Yeah.
like Pulitzer Prize winning novels, you have to say. But there was one, I just laughed about the story. He'd done this painting, and it's a pretty amazing painting of this priestess, a black woman, bald except for one bit of hair that goes straight down her back, and she's looking up with her hand like this and at this giant monster above her. It's a pretty impressive painting.
Yeah.
And about halfway, you know, so the publisher bought it, they commissioned a novel. About halfway through all this happening, the artist's wife went, you know, I'll bet they think that's a man because she doesn't have hair, doesn't have long wavy hair or anything like that. And they called up and asked, and sure enough, the writer was making it a man. It's like, those hips are not on a man. You know, the only thing you're basing it on is, you know, are you bald or do you have wavy hair? Wrong.
But that's a lot more than he and she. That's also relationships. If
Yeah.
you've changed an entire gender, you've changed
Yeah.
other characters, interactions.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's
I mean,
a
that's
lot of odd stuff that's happened.
big.
But
Yeah.
each battle is a different little battle. You have to, you know.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of times, these people, friends of mine that were painting covers, you know, were told to do the barbarian, the woman grabbing his leg, and a monster. And they do it, and then they get a copy of the book, and they might flip through it. It might be a science fiction book. And it was the art director going, but these sell.
Wow.
Do this. You know, and they're like, we couldn't do anything about it, because you know, a lot of times you're not even given the manuscript to look from. When I was
Yeah.
doing covers, I would always insist on seeing the manuscript.
Good for you.
But you know, because I've heard all those stories. Just
Yeah.
like
So, what is the consequence, using this horse example again, just the colors? If they had left it and she hadn't changed it, how many readers would actually even know? I mean,
it would depend on how specific the scene was. That it was,
where it was
because it could
described.
just be, you know, you just need to see a bunch of horses to buy the book. So some people, you know, I can remember that phase. I really liked horse. I read, oh Lord, now I can't even remember, Black Stallion books. That was it.
Yeah,
So,
well,
you know,
they were at
that.
least well written, because
Yeah.
some of them were garbage.
Yeah, most of them were
The Thoroughbred
call 'em?
series, or the
it's like
it's like the young adult version
a whole
of
bunch
romance.
of people all writing about the same thing. It's like the Hardy Boys.
The
or
series,
whatever.
yeah,
It wasn't one
exactly.
person. It wasn't whoever that guy was. Dixon.
Frank
Was it some-
Dixon.
Frank Dixon. There may not have even been a Frank Dixon, or there was for the first book.
2 books, yeah.
Yes. So,
Yeah.
a writing mill. That's what it's called. Yeah.
In dealing with a children's picture book, the storyboarding process, how much does the artist have to do with that, or does the author do that, decide all
No.
the page turns and all, or is that
No.
another collaboration thing?
That is, at least in my experience, and I can only talk about that, I get the manuscript and I break it down into the pictures that I want to paint or draw, and you run it by, usually the author is not going to have any say-so in a children's picture book. then, you know, you don't choose the artist unless it's, you know, somebody's got a giant name and they're going, I want to work with so and so, and they do that. But most of the time, it's a publisher gets the manuscript, they like it, and then they go and find an artist to do it, and then the artist is only communicating with the publisher and the art director, and you break it down the way you think it should be, and then they come back and suggest some changes. And then you do it, and then you have the author take their name off the book.
So it's kind of an editor artist,
Yeah.
art director.
Right. But it doesn't have anything to do with the writer for children's book. And even with novels and things, the writer usually has very little say-so in what's on the cover. And it's not even the art director, it's the marketing department. All the Earthsea books, up until what I did, he was always white, and sometimes he had blonde hair, and so, you know, a lot of the artists were never told that he was black skinned. He was actually red, copper skinned, and her whole idea of the Earthsea world was that everybody was Native American skinned or Mediterranean. There was no white people except for this one island. And that was because he was really tired of every single story being about, you know, blonde, blue-eyed people. So. Yes,
Would you ever want to write anything?
I am.
All right, what are you working on?
I've got a novel, 94,000 words. I've got a graphic novel that is the Appalachian Jacktails, but anthropomorphized into animals. And then I have a middle grade novel called The Greenwood that's told both with text and with graphic narrative sections.
Are those out or are those up?
No, those are all in process. So. The novel, I was just told by my, I've had the same agent for a while now, and he read through the book. He said, you know, Charles, I think this is just too old-fashioned to be able to sell it now. And I went, well, I'm kind of old-fashioned. So. You know, he was suggesting changes, and I'm like, I don't think so. So I'll probably self-publish it. That's what I think I'll do. I don't know. I'm open.
As an illustrator, well known, I'm assuming that your books were self-illustrated. To what extent would they tell you to change your artwork?
One of the things with the middle grade book is I've talked to a publisher that I really respect, a smaller publisher called Tachyon out of San Francisco. They've done some beautiful books, nothing really with much of any art in them, but the idea is to kickstart the money to pay me to illustrate it, and then they would publish it and distribute it. So, you know, that's the big problem with an artist. You want to do art.
Yeah.
You don't want to have to do the guerrilla marketing and the this and that and the other. So that takes care of all that. And, you know, so we'll see. It should work. It seems interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
Let's have a drink. Into the green.
Totally unconscious.
Did you see the book?